prophecy is not only foretelling, but forthtelling, so to speak. And I think it's more forthtelling. Hey, you guys. Welcome for another great episode of Unrefined Podcast. And we have Lindsay here in the house to co-host with us and BT producing. And we have an awesome guest today, Dr. Matthew Halsted, and he is coming to us talking about his new book, The End of the World As You Know It, what the Bible really says about the end times and why it's good news, which is really important to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me on the show. Appreciate the opportunity to come chat about the book.
I have a question before we really dive into this book. I was familiar with Dr. Matt and how you've been philosophically influenced. Can you tell us a little bit about that, the guy that's been philosophically influencing you and how that was used in your writing of this book?
In terms of, you asked about my hermeneutic influences. I did my PhD on Hans-Georg Gadamer, who was a 20th century German philosopher, and he is known as the father of what's called philosophical hermeneutics. And basically, that's just $1 million word for studying the philosophy of understanding. How do we understand not just the Bible, but any text? Or how do we understand art? How do we understand movies and plays? And how do we understand this conversation today? So there's a whole lot of mechanics that go into that question and into that answer. So I used Gadamer's insights to help me think through the way Paul quoted from the Old Testament scripture in his letter to Rome in the book of Romans. And so Gadamer is sort of my influence hermeneutically, and that's kind of been brought to bear upon this book in some ways. That's a whole conversation down the road, but yeah, that's pretty much the gist of it.
All right, Dr. Matt, let's dive into your book.
Yeah, absolutely. When it comes to Revelation, what ends up happening is, I would say, there's way too much creativity in these popular prophecy teachers that we read. Like they can make the text bend and twist in just magical ways, it seems like, to get the meaning that they want. And what I'm trying to do is say, okay, we need to come back to the drawing board and pay more attention to what Gadamer would call the horizon of the original context of the text, right? Because sometimes I think that gets ignored in popular prophecy teaching. They are so, quick to jump to modern application that they seem to flood the original context of these texts with their own assumptions. Now, I'm not against application. I mean, in fact, I'm a good Gadamerian. I think application is part of the interpretive process. So I don't fault them for that. I fault them for essentially muting the original context and not having a real life conversation with the text. And instead, it's a monologue for them. They read into the text too much, and it should be a dialogue. They should read into the text, but they should also let the text read into their situation and let it speak for itself. I mean, that's there's a lot there that I just said, but that's one way. The second way is it really helped me think about prophecy, because in the book I have this section about, I think it's called The Logic of Prophecy. And I talk about how prophecy in scripture is not merely about predicting the future. It's not like a Nostradamus crystal ball sort of thing where a prophet gets into this state of mind and he or she sees the future and predicts what that future might be. And that's not how it works. Like, so, I mean, I give examples of this, but really prophecy is more about like an original story being told, say in Isaiah, and that story is retold rather creatively in the New Testament. And I give examples of this. So let me just give a quick example, so I'm not speaking too abstractly here. But in Matthew chapter 2, verse 15, this is the context of the Holy Family, Joseph, Mary, and Jesus, going to Egypt to flee the persecution of Herod. And then they come back at a later time. And Matthew gives this curious statement in chapter 2, verse 15. He says, "This is to fulfill what the prophet said, quote, out of Egypt I called my son." Okay, so that's a quotation from Hosea. Now, it makes sense in that context because Herod is kind of functioning as a first century version of Pharaoh, persecuting the babies. I mean, where have we heard that before, right? And then Jesus is nursed in Egypt, which is the place where the people of God grew. And then Jesus and the Holy Family returned to the Promised Land. I mean, this is a classic Exodus example. And that makes sense why Matthew would say, out of Egypt I called my son. Now, here's the thing. When you go to Hosea chapter 11, verse 1, where that original prophecy was given, you notice something very peculiar. Indeed, something rather odd. Namely, Hosea is not predicting anything. I mean, he's not saying in the future, this is what's going to happen. What he's actually doing, and this is very important, what he's actually doing is recalling the past. If you go back and he's saying, basically, Hosea, well, it's actually God's voice, but God through Hosea is reminiscing about the past. He's in Hosea's time, he's saying, back in the day, out of Egypt, I called my son. This is my son whom I love. It's talking about the past, but that past event, this reminiscing of the past, not even a future prediction, it's being cast by Matthew, by St. Matthew himself, as a prophecy fulfilled. Now, if we think, this is why this is important, if we think that prophecy is all about predicting something that will be fulfilled in the future, we've got major problems here.
Well, I've always heard that prophecy is not only foretelling, but forthtelling, so to speak. And I think it's more forthtelling, honestly, in a lot of ways than it is foretelling.
So
you agree with that?
I do agree with that. I would just add a bit more to it. I would say it is forthtelling, but it's also reenacting the original story. Like it's about the story getting reenacted later, and so it's getting kind of like replayed again. The classic repurposing the story in a creative way, of course. So like Jesus, if you pay really close attention to the book of Matthew, especially the first 7 chapters, you have Jesus reenacting the story of Israel. I've already mentioned the whole Exodus retelling with Herod and fleeing Egypt. He gets baptized in the Jordan River, which is a pretty peculiar spot in the history of Israel. At the baptism, Jesus is led into a wilderness for how long? 40 days. That's significant. He's tempted by some of the same sins that Israel is tempted with, notably about food. And obeying the word of God and all that kind of stuff. And then Jesus climbs mountains, starts talking about Torah. I mean, this is classic retelling the story of Israel. And he has to. It makes sense because God promised that it would be through Israel, through Abraham's family, that he would bless the world and that he would rescue the world. And so God needs a faithful Israelite to do it. And so Matthew's showing that Jesus is the faithful Israel. He's the new Israel. And so he's reenacting these things. But here's my point. This reenactment, this repurposing, is how prophecy works for Matthew. That's what it means to fulfill a prophecy. It's not about prediction. It's about reenactment and repurposing. And I can't remember. I think there was a biblical scholar, somebody talking about act and reenactment. But for me, I get a lot of this from Gadamer, the same idea. And I can't remember. Maybe gosh, the older I get, the more I forget. But I think it seems like there was somebody who used, talks about prophecies being act and reenactment or something like that. But for me, anyway, Gadamer talks about interpretation about a drama being replayed and being performed. Like dramas exist to be performed.
There's a theologian that I'm familiar with that actually. A guy named Kevin Van Hooser who deals a lot with reenactment prophecy and being a theodrama type.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So
that makes sense. Yeah, for me, a lot of mine comes from Gadamer. I mean, he talks about how you interpret like a song. Like if I got my guitar right now, I could play a song you could recognize from a famous artist. Now it's not going to sound the exact same way. It's going to be a rather different rendition, but it's enough that you would see it. So it's kind of reenacting that thing. Yeah.
Like I've been feeling, and we've been doing on our podcast, we've been interviewing different people on different types of eschatology. Just number one, because I'm still searching, and I'm still learning, and been a Christian for over 30 years, seminary trained and all that stuff. And in seminary, I wasn't really trained that there was any one certain. We were trained, here's your buffet, pick one that you think is the most biblical, which is, I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's okay. And so for years, I've joked and said I was pan, and I've just really, since the podcast world has come about and some of the things we podcast about, I've really been exploring eschatology, and Lindsay and I talk about it all the time, going back and forth between different things. And what I want to say first before we get into it is your book is truly different. There was a review. I hate this. It's on your thing that says he's just a preterist, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy did not read this book. What's up with that? Anyway, and it's so much more than that. And I've been recommending it all over the place, even to like people I know that are rapture dispensationalists. I just want them to see another side of the coin, and that's a pun intended. And the whole Mark of the Beast chapter just blew me away.
Yeah.
So we'll get to it. But if you will, just tell us the backstory of what made you decide to write this, and then kind of just take us through. If there was only like two or three things out of this book that you wanted people to know, let's go over those instead of just trying to capture the whole book. Would that be
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah. So just so I understand your question, you want to know what the genesis of the book, how to get started,
Yeah,
and then
yeah,
also what couple points. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I didn't plan on writing this book in a way that one normally plans to write a book. So for example, back in 2020 at the height of COVID and during that season, I had been seeing a lot on social media about COVID and how it might relate to prophecy and to the end times. And I saw a lot of speculation about that. A lot of Bible verses were being tossed around and used, and they were being mapped onto memes and things like that. And of course, I would have conversations with my wife, and she was like, you should really like respond to some of these things because
Yeah.
it might be helpful. And I was initially hesitant. Um, you just don't always want to get involved in online disputes.
The trolls come out at night.
And
Yeah.
indeed they did. And so I ended up my wife convinced me to do it. So I pull out my iPhone, the notes app, and I just scribble down a few things, some thoughts in response to things. And I actually had seen, if I remember correctly, I had seen like a picture that somebody was posting that I don't even remember what the picture was, but it was something about the mark of the beast and
Oh yeah.
COVID and 666 and all that stuff. And so I shared that picture and posted my notes on why I thought that was a misapplication of Revelation 13. And long story short, it resonated with a lot of folks. It was shared a lot actually, and it hit me. I was like, wow, this is really resonating with people. And a friend of mine, he was at the time he was an editor for the Logos academic blog, it's now known as Word by Word. But anyway, it's Logos's blog. Anyway, he emailed me or messaged me and said, "Hey, dude, can I share that? Can we put that on the blog?" And I said, "Of course, let's do it." And let me just change a few things because I wanted to add more scriptural references and just that kind of stuff because I knew the blog was for pastors and scholars and things like that. And so I did post it on the website, and it took off. As far as I know, I mean, maybe this has changed in the past couple of years, but as far as I know, that was at the time the most viewed article on the blog. Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
And it just went everywhere. People were quoting it and citing it. There was a Yahoo News article that referenced it or embedded a link to it, and so it was just everywhere. And I was beginning to interact with people in their comments in the comment section, and then I had this really long comment response, And my editor friend was like, hey, let's take your really long response and make it another article. And I was like, okay, let's do it. And so we posted a follow up, and that did pretty well too. And anyway, this topic just really resonated with people. And all I was doing was just passing on information. Like I wasn't making a contribution to scholarship or anything. That I was just saying, hey, this is not what scholars are saying. If you dive into the scholarly literature, they are not saying the stuff that you're seeing on Facebook, right?
Oh, no,
And
that jumped
yeah.
out at me when you said that in the book. That jumped out at me. I'm like, boom, yeah, I'm not a professor or anything, but I'm theologically trained, and that's kind of my thing. And I'm like reading the Academy, and I'm reading like Popular, and they're not the same. It's like, whoa, these are like totally different churches. And unfortunately, a lot of times the lay people don't hear the Academy, or if they do, it's the negative side of the Academy. But
Mhm.
yeah, I really noticed that really jumped out at me when you wrote that in that book. That yeah, Craig Keener, I just had on my show. He's like that. He's definitely not a dispensational left behind kind of guy, And you quote him a lot in your footnotes and stuff. And I'm just like, wow, that is so true, so true.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely a bridge that needs to be built between the church and the academy, because there are so many good insights in the scholarly literature that needs to be processed and filtered for consumption in the church, whether that's through Bible
Mm,
studies or sermons and things like that. But you don't see that. And there are lots of reasons for that. Understand many of them are understandable reasons. Pastors just don't have a lot of time. They're very busy essentially running a nonprofit, right? They're thinking about
yeah.
budgets and staff management and stuff more than, unfortunately, they have time to dedicate to teaching and things like that. So I totally get it. It's just the world we live in. But at the
Well, let
same
me let,
time,
let me say this. I'm
yeah,
sorry to
go ahead.
interrupt you. I keep interrupting you, but
No, no, it's great.
your book goes a long way in helping that, because that's why I liked it, is because it was academic, however, yet it could be understood by the popular crowd too. It was written in a way that was not, it's a rare gift of someone who can take something that's so dense and so complicated and make it even for people that aren't in the academy to really understand and get. And your book goes a long way in doing that. I just wanted to tell you that. So
Thank you so much. And I want to give credit where it's due. Is I had a really good editor. He was fantastic. I mean, I learned a lot actually working with him. Elliot. He's fantastic, and so hopefully I get to work with him again. But yeah, he was really helpful in helping me to condense things in chunks and bite-sized chunks and things like that, because I tend to get
yeah.
real wordy. So yeah.
So, Matthew, since we brought up this mischaracterization of your work earlier, maybe are you a preterist, or is it just one aspect kind of how you approach eschatology? Or what I noticed is, yeah, some preterism, but also just a more open-ended kind of system that leaves room for possibilities in the future. So, kind of, I guess, unpack that a little bit for us.
Yeah, great question. I have been accused of being a preterist. But that's tame. I was once called an agent of Satan. So, uh, so, so at
I'm
least
sorry. That's
it's
so
not.
bad. Oh, that's awful.
No, it was all good. Yeah,
Oh man.
it is really funny how near and dear we hold our eschatology. Because
Mm.
once we start questioning, it's like, wow. I suspect some are probably thinking I'm on the devil's payroll or something like that. But
Well, you know what? I wish someone would write a book of why most majority of cults out there are all Adventist cults. Anyway, that's a side note, neither here or there. So
well, on your question about preterism, I would deny that I'm a full preterist. I mean, I
yeah,
believe, for example, that Jesus will return bodily in the way that he left. There's no doubt in my mind about that. So, I mean, that's my faith. Like at church, we, as a body of believers, every single Sunday, we confess what is called the mystery of faith. Christ has died, Christ has risen, Christ will come again. And this is a part of our confession. And I believe that 100%. And so I'm not a preterist. I think there's more to come. If we want to keep splicing it, like I'm also a believer that there's going to be a final Antichrist somewhere on the scene when Jesus comes. I think it's possible that things get intense at that time. That's as so there are future things that I'm anticipating, right, based on my reading of Scripture, and based on the tradition, the church's tradition too. So there are a lot of this. I'm not a preterist and a full preterist. Now, okay, I suppose somebody can say, well, you're a partial preterist, and I would probably respond, well, I would respond in multiple ways. I just don't like labels, so I would probably respond by saying, well, why do you call me a partial preterist and not like a partial futurist or something? What is it? I think it's because preterism is such a bogeyman word, right? It's just such a
Yep.
And so it's sort of like, well, you're wrong, but you're not quite wrong, or something like that. You're not all wrong. And so the other thing too is I think every Christian is a preterist to some extent. I mean,
Oh yeah, sure.
If you believe Jesus died and resurrected and ascended, those are events of the past, right?
Yeah.
I don't like any of those titles because the way I understand eschatology is I don't think like when we say preterist or futurist or whatever, we tend to assume when we say that eschatology is it can be reduced down to just a bunch of events. When do you think the events happened? Do you think all of them happened already? Well, you're a preterist. Some of them happened already, you're a partial preterist, or they're all future, then you're a futurist. But see, I think the assumption there is misguided. I don't think you can reduce eschatology down to a bunch of events. Because in my book, I show, I think convincingly, I show that, and I say that eschatology is not an event; it's a person. Jesus says, "I'm the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning, and the end." I mean, he's our protology, the beginning, and he's also our eschatology, the end. And he, in his life and ministry and work, he encapsulates our hopes, all of them. And so, when I think of the end times specifically, the times of the end, because the way I understand, his work on earth in the first century and his future return and consummation of the kingdom, I think the end times is that time period after his resurrection and ascension and prior to his coming again. So for me, the whole preterism question and idea is interesting. It's fine, but what I like to say is I am a believer in Jesus as the eschatology, and so there are I give the analogy of a river. There are some things in this end times river that have already happened. That's downstream. Upstream, there's other things that, haven't happened yet. But we're all in eschatology. We're all at the eschaton in some sense. We are in the end days.
Yes. I really noticed that. I picked that up in the book, and I like that. I'm like, we are kind of mavericks ourselves, and this is a real maverick way to take it. Like I shirk all labels, and I'm going to read the text and have a dance, so to speak, like the perichoresis of the Trinity. Like I'm going to have a dance with the scriptures here, and I'm going to see where some of these other labels may be right, but I'm not going to accept that label. And then where this other label is right, but I'm not going to accept that label. And that's what I appreciate that a lot in your book too. It's its own system, so to speak, and it's even more than just a system. It's about a person. It's the revelation. If you're just speaking about the book of Revelation, it's the revelation of Jesus Christ. And I think we have to bear that in mind, that that's the sum of what we're talking about.
Right.
What in the book that if you had like two things that you really wanted to get out to the body of Christ, that needs to that we need to change the way we look at eschatology, change the way we look at what's coming, that you think are the most important? I know this is going to be hard because your whole book is important, but what would
yeah, that was a great. Sorry, I was just trying to think out loud here. I was like, there's so many things here that I think are helpful and important topic wise and so forth. But this is good. I think the first thing would be, let's reconsider what tribulation actually means.
Oh yeah.
Because when I say in a church context, if I go up to most any evangelical church today and I say from the pulpit, I say, hey guys, I want to talk about the tribulation. Everybody's going to think immediately, oh, he's going to talk about the future, right?
Mm-hmm.
And biblically, I'm not so sure that is that idea, that assumption is warranted. I mean, Jesus says, let me just run through some examples here off the top of my head. Jesus says in John 16:33, he says, in the world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer, I've overcome the world. He's talking to people in the first century.
Right.
In the book of Acts, they are was it Acts 7? Is it part of, I think it's part of Stephen's sermon there.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
He talks about the famine of Egypt during the time of Joseph, and that was called a great, I think the ESV translates it as great affliction or something like that, but it's actually thlipsis, meaning tribulation. It could be translated as that. And so the great tribulation, according to that text, the concept great tribulation can be applied to the past. You also get into Matthew 24, a highly controversial text, of course, but you get into that where Jesus, at least depending on your view, he's talking about the first century and he calls it a tribulation.
Mm-hmm.
There are John in John chapter 1, the author says, I, John, am a partner with you in the tribulation, which a lot of translations will say affliction or the persecution, rather. I think the New Revised Standard Version has persecution. That's fine. It's a fine word, but it's thlipsis. It's the same word that we use in Matthew 24, talk about tribulation. So I think if you just look at the data here, it's not easy to just believe that tribulation is all future. I mean, it was past, present, and future, and that's a really hard thing to grasp. Given our maybe evangelical context and tradition. But I just ask people, like, okay, let's just run an experiment. Let's take our eschatological glasses off for just a moment, put them on the shelf. You can always pick them back up later. No worries, no commitment here. But just for a moment, read the Bible and read what the Bible has to say about just the concept of tribulation. And I guarantee you what you'll see is that tribulation is a reality of every period. And when it comes to the context of Jesus, it seems to be the reality of the Jesus period between the first and second comings of Jesus. So that's one thing I wish people, would consider taking a deep dive and a study through. It's a fun journey. It's interesting to take the time to do that. And I think there's a lot of pastoral and practical value that can come from that. We can go through our current tribulation if we know that our brothers and sisters in the past have gone through it successfully. And so there's all that sort of stuff. So that's the first thing. Quickly, the second thing here. Oh goodness. I would say I would say maybe let's think deeply about the book of Revelation itself. We have this immediate assumption that Revelation is all about the future. And I would just suggest a different reading. This is something you mentioned, Craig Keener, earlier. This is something he mentioned in his Revelation commentary.
Yeah.
He says, look, if John says that blessed are those who keep the words of this prophecy. And Keener makes an astute observation here. He says, look, if they're supposed to obey or keep the words of this prophecy, that implies that they understand it, right? that it's discernible to them, that that it's And so, but often with modern day prophecy teaching, in modern day prophecy teaching, the assumption is, the demon horde is a bunch of Apache helicopters, or this is a nuclear weapon, and none of which would have been even remotely understandable. Nowadays, we're talking about nanotechnology and COVID vaccines, and none of that would register in their categories of options in the first century. So whatever any of that stuff means, and I don't confess to understand everything, by no means. There's a lot I don't know.
Right.
But whatever it does mean, it would have been understandable to them. And once we let that set in, then and only then can we entertain modern day application, and there's room for creative application here. There's lots of room for that, but we have to get Revelation right. In the words of Michael Gorman, he has a book called Reading Revelation Responsibly. And I would say we need to approach Revelation responsibly as well.
Oh yeah, and I think, not to be too terribly critical or whatever, but the less responsible understanding of text sells more books a lot of times. I'm just going to go out there and say that because I am unrefined, but also, and I'm not saying that that's the author's goal, but it does, and it's just more popular. And it amazes me that people don't realize how young, relatively, in the whole scheme of the tradition of the church, that is. I mean, yeah, there were some early church fathers that were pre-millennial, but
Yeah.
this is what we're talking about is not even really historic premillennialism. So
Mm-hmm. Right.
yeah, and that really stuck out at me at the book. The whole mark of the beast really blew me away. That it's just something simple as a coin that would have the mark of the beast, which was whatever Roman emperor, Nero, whoever, at the time, and you had to take that to trade, and that all made sense in their context in their time, and that 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 just seems foundational. And then going back to what you had said earlier too, I wanted to interject this is we have this American exceptionalism that drives me crazy when it comes to eschatology. And that goes back to that Greek word that, what is it in for tribulation? It's all,
Thlipsis.
yeah. I went
Yeah.
back and like studied through it and look, it's all over the place, and it's translated obviously at convenience of translators sometimes too. And
Yeah.
it's clearly, you can't tell someone in a Chinese house church right now that they're not going through a great tribulation. Or
Mm.
North Korea, when you get, I have a missionary friend who helps train people in Russia right next to North Korea, and they go into North Korea, they get found out, they get pulled into the middle of the square, they get basically assassinated or put to death right there in the middle of the square of the thing. I mean, that's pretty much great tribulation.
Mm-hmm.
So this American exceptionalism, and I don't mean that in a political sense, even though it can, but that so goes the United States, so goes the end times and the end of the world. And I think your book goes a long way of dispelling that with that understanding of tribulation,
Mm-hmm.
and that understanding of that we have to go back to the first meaning of the text first, which is just
Mm-hmm.
good practice, and then we can work our way up from there. One of my favorite systematic theologians is a guy named Thomas Oden, Paleo Orthodoxy, and I love the way he did his systematic. He starts with the Bible, he goes with the fathers, then he goes up to the reformers, and then modern day. And he puts as much weight, the nearer he gets to us, the less weight he puts on what they have to say. And I think that is what your book does, if that makes any sense at all.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah. Um, you mentioned the global church, and yeah, I mean, goodness, I'm just, I'm almost at a loss for words here because, um, I don't think people understand the gravity, and I'm not trying to be dramatic here or anything like
Yeah,
that, but
yeah.
I do want to be serious because I don't think people, modern prophecy teachers in particular, I don't think they understand just how I got to pick my words right here because I don't want to be disingenuous. I don't think they understand the consequences of their assumptions because when we take this the recent solar eclipse fiasco.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, so do you guys know who Scott McKnight is?
Yes, absolutely. I
Yeah.
have his book on Revelation sitting right beside me. Yep.
Oh, good. Yeah. Y'all should have him on the show. He's a great guy. But he shared on he shared on, I think it was like Facebook. It was a meme, but it was so good. It was something like solar eclipses happen all over the world, but only when they happen over America is it the end times.
That's it.
and
Yeah.
That's it.
and so it's just terribly hilarious, and I agree with that. That just the assumption there is just it's America-centered, Western-centric ideas, and when
Yes.
and that's the assumption behind these modern prophecy texts. And I don't think we've grasped the consequences that come when good, honest, sincere Christians in the pew read books like that, because that reinforces a hermeneutic of self-centeredness, and it fosters the idea that I as I live in this country, I'm the center of not just the world. I'm the
Right.
center of God's cosmic eschatological plans.
Scary
And
place.
that is so dangerous. And when we catechize ourselves into that hermeneutic, we shape our souls to be a certain sort of person that is, when it's given full fruition, could be quite dangerous, I think. And so, but you mentioned North Korea, the saints, our brothers and sisters who we should sit under their feet and learn what it means to be followers of Jesus. Like these saints in
Yeah.
hard places in the world, who they go to church at great risk of their lives, and they worship, they teach, they put their lives on the line, and we forget them. Our eschatology excludes them.
Yes.
And I mean, they're not freaking out when they could have a gun put to their head. We freak out when the sun goes dark for 4 minutes and think that it's the end of the world because we're that self-centered, you know.
Or
Um,
or let me be even more personal. Oh, somebody leaves me a bad comment on Facebook. I'm being persecuted. It's just like,
right,
oh my goodness
right.
gracious. Yeah. Yep. Yep.
And so there's a lot here, and I wish Christians understood tribulation. Let me say one more thing about tribulation.
Yeah.
Um, Tribulation, in my opinion, is any sort of trial that a Christian goes through that threatens to destroy their faith or threatens to push against the work of God in their life.
Right.
And we Americans often think that we are undergoing tribulation every so often, and it's so bad and everything like that. And on the one hand, I have two thoughts of like, okay, please stop, because you need to learn just a little something about the global church, and then you'll have a different view. But on the other hand, I actually think a case could be made that there are a lot of Christians in our own country who are living very comfortable lives, who go to their church, but the gospel doesn't impact their lives for good, but they still faithfully go to church. They live their lives in comfort and wealth and all those sorts of things. And they think that they're good with God. But in fact, what if it's the case that their comfort is a sort of tribulation that they don't even notice?
Oh wow.
And you know what I mean? So one
Yeah.
example, I heard this story. I can't substantiate this story, but a friend was telling me he had heard it. And anyway, it sounds pretty intense. And I think we all would admit that this sort of thing happens all the time. But there was a Christian who was in a persecuted country, and he was on fire for Jesus. He withstood persecution and the threats thereof, and he leaves the country, comes to America, and lives in one of our most illustrious cities, and gets a taste of our wealth and gets a taste of our comfort and all that kind of stuff, and he loses his faith. He ends up losing his faith. And my
Mm,
friend made this comment. He said, "What this communist persecuting country could not do to his faith, American comfort did."
wow. Comfort as affliction, as tribulation. That sounds like a good blog post or article or something like that. Comfort as affliction. Yeah, I wanted to interject one more thing, and I was going to let Lindsay loose with some questions, but
Sure.
uh, uh, along with that same vein is we don't realize that we in America are like you just kind of alluded to, sort of lukewarm. And I'm being stereotypical, and it's just not everybody. And if I get flack for this, hey, I get flack. But on a good note, throughout the whole world that is experiencing this tribulation, there is a massive influx because we work with what we call CPM and DMM, which is church planting movements and stuff like that in America, but in other countries as well. And you see massive influxes of Muslims and Buddhists and and all these coming into the kingdom despite the tribulation and the persecution. And that goes with what you just said about comfort. It's almost like comfort is one of the hardest tribulations to endure.
Yeah.
Wow, that's so profound, Dr. Matt. I mean, that's wow. Anyway, so Lindsay,
Well, yeah, it's less a question and more just a confession, I guess. This, like, I had found myself, especially after all the kind of the madness that came in the wake of the pandemic and everything, just kind of looking more towards more, not even dispensationalist. I made up my mind a long time ago I could do with that, but more just futurist readings of Revelation. And again, I don't want to ever close that out. You never know what could happen, but just finding that it kind of, honestly, at some point, it just got to more where I felt like, do I really think this is going to happen, or does this just tickle my ears a little more than a more, not even preterist, but even just kind of an idealist kind of, hey, this is true in all times. This bit of the book of Revelation is just always true and something I need to glean from and put into practice at all times, no matter what's going on. So I don't know. What would you say to people who feel like they are questioning? Am I just wanting to tickle my ears with this more sensational reading of Revelation, or is this something that I feel like could be on the horizon?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think I've not read this book yet, and I'm trying to remember the title, but I need to get my hands on it because it looks excellent. It's about dispensationalism, I think. Maybe it's the one that's called Rise and Fall of Dispensationalism. I don't know. But it seems like somebody was commenting on that. I think either it was the author or it was a commentator talking about this sort of question, is that um it this sensationalism is not really ever about finding answers, right? Because you would have people say things like, I mean, well-known people say things like, "We are the final generation." I mean, I quote one of them in my book. It
yeah,
was he's a well-known prophecy teacher. We're the terminal generation, I think is how he phrased it. And the time's ticking. But there's been all kinds of people like that who have made these claims that they stake some event, or they stake their words on a certain event that they say is going to happen, and they pair Bible verses with it and say, well, what happens when those things never come about? I mean, 2 years ago, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 years ago, maybe some event in the Middle East got all of our attention and we were all consumed with that. In the year 2000, it was Y2K, lots of Bible verses tossed about that. And nothing ever happens. Nothing ever like pans out. And yet we just keep coming back to those same teachers. And the next thing that happens in the Middle East, they're going to be writing a book about that one thing. And they're going to show you where that's at in the book of Ezekiel or whatever. And so if the commentator or somebody, or maybe it was the author, whoever, talking about this book, they made a great point. And my apologies, I just don't remember who said this, but it's not a thought original to me, is what I guess what I'm trying to say. But he made the comment and said, it was never about finding answers. It's always, I think he said something like, it was always about the chase.
Yeah.
It's always about
interesting. Yeah.
the excitement of it or something. And maybe there's something to that. Like,
We are adrenaline-based
are,
country.
Yeah.
yeah, I think we're just bored.
Yeah.
And we bored ourselves to death. And we're an entertainment-based culture, and we're not that interested in long-form discussion, going into depth on some issue and things like that. And so when somebody pops out a book, a 100-page book, there's no sources cited, there's no research that they're showing you. I don't mean to be I don't mean to be like unfair or uncharitable here, but I think it's true, is to say a middle school math student knows more of their responsibility to show their work than some of these prophecy teachers do, right? I mean, you remember in middle school, if you just give the answer to a math problem, that doesn't work. You need to show me how you got there, your methodology. And a lot of these prophecy teachers will make bold claims, and they will get their readers to sometimes vote a certain way without ever showing their work. And I find that very interesting. And it reminds me of what Michael Gorman says in his Reading Revelation Responsibly book, is that people make life decisions on these issues. And so, yeah, I just think we just need to take great care in thinking about them, and being careful about them. And I don't even know if, does that answer your question, or
No,
am I?
yeah, it does. I mean,
Okay.
it's, and I guess I also think about not going to the other extreme of just being viewed as like burying our heads in the sand as far as the future
Correct.
is concerned. So
Yeah, I don't want to do that either. And I feel like I've opened up possibilities. Like,
I thought you did,
in
for
Matthew
sure.
24, I say things like, it's possible some of these things will get reenacted in the future, and so I'm open to some of these things. But my main point is to say we just can't speculate about the details. I mean, you have people who, and I think I cite these in the book, but you have people saying, "Oh, the Antichrist is going to be a socialist from Europe. He's going to do this. He's going to be in his 40s." And like, how do you know this stuff? You know? And anyway, so
and it, at least 200 or 300 years ago, when it was the Pope or the Vatican or whatever, there were some political reasons for that. Now it's just kind of just pure speculative, and
right.
And it's disingenuous to me. It just doesn't. We're on the search for truth, and if we can't back up what we're saying, then it could be true, but it's not being articulated as truth. It needs that. You need to show your work. I like that. You need to show your work. I used to get that all the time, because the reason was I was cheating in the back of the book getting the answers, and I wasn't really working the problems.
Yeah.
So that's a great analogy. This has been an awesome talk, and there's so much more I want to talk to you about, but our time's getting there. But what I would like for you to do, if it's all right with you, Dr. Matt, is would you pray for us and our audience dealing with this, and having open minds and learning to really just go deeper than what's in the National Enquirer of the Christian world, so to speak. So I know that's kind of unrefined comment, but still, will you do that?
I'm happy to do this. And there's a great prayer that I pray. It comes from the Book of Common Prayer, and I'll end on this prayer, and because I think it helps just centering our minds and asking God for a steady heart, a steady mind, and a heart that it uses the word, an unconquered heart that no tribulation can destroy, and asking God for a heart that is upright, that nothing can tempt us to distraction, right? And so anyway, this is a prayer that I pray because it just really helps center my own heart and my mind. And so I'll end with that prayer. It's attributed to St. Thomas Aquinas, but it's a beautiful prayer. So, okay, let's pray.
Okay.
Lord, thank you for this conversation. What a blessing it's been to talk about Scripture and to talk about the ways in which we can read it faithfully. Help us, Lord, to do that, to read it faithfully. Help us to be people who treat Scripture with the utmost care and respect, because as your revelation to us, as the Word of God, it testifies to what you want us to hear. It gives us instructions for how to live. It gives us insights on what we ought to believe. It is a light to our path. We are to use it as we journey in our lives, as we go about our existence here on this earth. And we pray that you'd help us to do that faithfully and carefully. Give us, O Lord, a steadfast heart, which no unworthy thought can drag down. an unconquered heart which no tribulation can wear out, an upright heart which no unworthy purpose can tempt aside. Bestow upon us understanding to know you, diligence to seek you, wisdom to find you, and faithfulness that finally may embrace you. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Matthew, for coming on our show and just having a conversation about all this. I think people need to hear this. They need to hear alternate views, and I don't even really see yours as an alternate view. I just see it as, reading the text hermeneutically and coming up with some, because yours goes really close to another guest that we had on our show, very similar, who was amillennial-ish, but yet he still, allows the futuristic thing, and I think so often we do the either or, and it needs to be a both and. So
Yeah.
But anyway, well, thank you so much for being on our show.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation.
Thanks for listening and supporting us. And remember, stay naturally supernatural.